My hands were cold and trembling as I held the transfer receipt. The paper felt too thin for what it meant. $70000 printed in small black type. My name on the bank stamp. Around me the parish hall sang with applause. Bishop Miller's voice floated over the sound, warm and practiced, thanking the community for its generosity. The heat from the radiator touched the backs of the plastic chairs. Coffee and stale cake hung in the air, sweet and a little sour. I could taste it whenever I swallowed. I'd been sitting in that same row for 40 years. The vinyl squeaked under me when I shifted. I could feel the seam of my dress against my knee. My wedding band sat heavy where it always does, a cool circle that kept me anchored. And I kept touching it without thinking, as if it might remind me who I was meant to be in that room. 2 months before, when the storm had come through, the gutters had blown like a loose drum. That was the day I first saw the water stains on the ceiling. The treasurer showed slides that afternoon. Mold, rotted beams, shingles peeled back like old wallpaper. "We need 60,000 by the end of the quarter," he said, his voice dry. Someone coughed. The room smelled like rain and damp wool. I felt something unclench in my chest. I had just closed on my parents' house in Connecticut. Henry and I had lived there when the kids were small. Selling it felt like folding up a lifetime. But the attic smelled of old books and cedar. The house had paid for our funeral, our groceries, the little extras that make a life gentle. My pension was steady. I didn't need it. I thought of the choir loft at St. Matthew's, of the way Henry would tap his foot to the organ. The thought of that church with a new roof felt like my thanks. After the service I asked to see Bishop Miller. He had that easy smile, calm eyes, a suit that always looked new. He reached for my hand. "Martha, this is a blessing," he said. He pressed my fingers with polite enthusiasm. The bishop's ring warm and heavy as a seal. "But maybe keep it between us. We don't want others to feel they didn't have to give. Keep it between us." He said it so softly like it was helping. I nodded. His eyes flicked away for a beat, and I felt something tilt in me. There was a furtive quality to his smile, a carefulness that smelled faintly of perfume and polished wood. Mr. Peterson, the treasurer, was nearby. His folder tucked like armor under his arm. He cleared his throat. His face went the color of paper. I transferred the money the next morning. The click of the bank app felt unreal, like dropping a coin into a wishing well. I sealed the envelope with the printed confirmation and tucked it in my bag. It was there when I volunteered at the hospital on Wednesdays, when I made tea for myself and sat on the porch with the light catching the gray in my hair. I kept touching the corner of that envelope. It became a talisman. In the weeks that followed, the tone in the church shifted. Bishop Miller started talking about our donors during announcements. He listed the Atkinses, the Thompsons, people whose names always bookend the parish newsletter. He praised community effort, in a voice that rolled like a hymn, and left out the name of a woman who had given more than any of them. Mr. Peterson avoided my eyes at committee meetings. His hand would flutter to his throat in a little cough whenever I passed. The wallpaper in the office smelled of lemon cleaner and old paper. I found myself listening for the sound of the copier, for the clink of keys, as if the building might give away secrets. One afternoon, as I folded tablecloths for the bazaar, I overheard Bishop Miller and Mr. Peterson in the hallway. Their voices were low. Footsteps softened on the carpet. "We should highlight the Atkins family in the newsletter," Bishop Miller was saying. "They're connected, and it'll help future campaigns." "And Mrs. Winters?" Mr. Peterson asked, a thin sound. "Keep it discreet," the bishop replied. His tone was final like a lid closing. "She's elderly. We don't need to publicize her finances." Elderly. The word landed like a stone. My hand stilled. The sound of the radio in the kitchen was suddenly far away. I could feel the texture of the linen in my hands, the small ridges against my fingertips. I remembered Henry's hands, calloused, steady, and the way he used to say, Speak Up, Martha started as a small ember. On the Sunday of the dedication, the hall was bright with banners and balloons. The banner read, "Thank you to all who helped." The bishop climbed the small stage and spoke with the easy cadence of someone used to being listened to. He called names: Atkins, Thompson, Parker, and the congregation rose, applause washing over them. I watched faces light up at the mention of a name, the little bows people gave to attention. My chest tightened as if someone had set a hand on it. The applause felt like a tide pulling me under, but my feet rose before my head could argue. I stood. I pulled the envelope from my bag. The paper trembled. The microphone felt too cold when I picked it up. The room quieted like a held breath. "Bishop Miller," I said, and my voice surprised me with its steadiness. "I made the transfer for the roof. $70,000. I heard Mr. Peterson's chair scrape. I saw the bishop's smile falter, saw the color drain from his face. I opened the envelope slowly and let the papers fall onto the podium like a small confession. "I did this because I love this church," I told them. "Because this is where Henry and I brought our children. Because you sat with me when he died. I did not do it for applause. I did not do it to be visible. But I believed this place stood for truth." The silence that followed was a thing with weight. Footsteps, the faint crinkle of programs. Maria found me in the parking lot afterward, hands out, eyes wet. "We had no idea," she said. Her fingers brushed my arm warm, a quick prayer in skin. Others came, some to say sorry, some to say they'd always wondered. The next Sunday, half the pews were empty. Bishop Miller was reassigned within a few weeks. The roof looks sound when I pass by on my morning walks now. But I go to a smaller chapel 10 blocks away. No banners, no named donors. The hymn is softer there. My envelope sits in the bottom of my drawer. I still touch my wedding band when I think of Henry. And when doubt creeps in, I hear my father's voice. "In the doubt, choose the truth." The words linger, like the smell of cedar in an old attic, steady and honest. My hands were cold and trembling as I held the transfer receipt. The paper felt too thin for what it meant. $70,000 printed in small black type. My name on the bank stamp. Around me the parish hall sang with applause. Bishop Miller's voice floated over the sound, warm and practiced, thanking the community for its generosity. The heat from the radiator touched the backs of the plastic chairs. Coffee and stale cake hung in the air, sweet and a little sour. I could taste it whenever I swallowed. "My loves, thank you for taking this little bit of time to sit with me. I need to be honest. This channel is just getting started, and every new subscriber is a breath of life as we try to reach our first goal of 1,000. If this story moves you, please click subscribe. And drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. A few days before I stood in the parish hall with the transfer receipt in my hands, the morning felt ordinary in the way that small towns are ordinary. Quiet, predictable, almost tender. I woke to the sun slipping between the slats of the kitchen blind, a pale rectangle of light that traveled across the linoleum like a slow hand. The kettle hissed on the stove. Coffee filled the room with that bitter, warm smell that always seems to make decisions possible. The church bells rang at 9. They sounded different in spring, bright like wind through glass. I wrapped my cardigan around my shoulders the way I always have, fingers finding the worn patch at the heel where Henry used to smooth the fabric absent-mindedly. My wedding band sat cool against my palm. I touch it without thinking. Keeps me steady. For 40 years St. Matthew's has been the map of my life. We baptized our 3 children in that wooden font. We celebrated Christmas pageants under those awkward stage lights. When Henry's heart stopped, the pews were filled with people who remembered him tapping his foot to the organ. I learned here how a congregation can be both harbor and mirror. I learned the rhythm of good Sundays and the slow grief of empty ones. I volunteer at the county hospital 3 afternoons a week. I fold blankets, hold hands, fetch tea. It keeps my hands busy and my mind honest. On Wednesdays I always pack the same things and people here know me. I bake the loaves for the potluck. I teach the occasional Sunday school when they ask. I am the one they call when someone needs a ride home from the hospital. Maria, with her bright earrings and laugh like a hymn, is my friend. We share homework answers for the Bible study and swap recipes that taste like childhood. George Peterson, the treasurer, counts receipts with the sort of care that looks almost holy. He carries a leather folder like armor. Bishop Miller, he's newer, younger, with that tidy hair and a smile that always looks practiced for the camera. He is ambitious in a way I admired at first, the kind of man who can make budgets feel like sermons. That week the rain had come hard. The gutters sang and shuddered all night, and the morning after you could see where water had crept under the shingles. I remember standing under the eaves with my hand on the porch rail, feeling the cold and the exactness of decay. The treasurer showed slides of rot and black mold. He talked numbers like digits on a ledger that could be scrubbed clean if enough hands reached in. 60,000, he said, and the number landed in my chest like a stone. The envelope in my bag felt heavier after that service. In the parking lot the mulch still smelled of wet earth and the cedar from the funeral we'd had last fall. I thought of my parents' house, how Henry and I had packed it up, wrapped the photographs carefully, closed the attic door. The men who sold the house had left the cedar smell in the hallways and, when the papers were signed, my bank app showed a balance that made my hands tremble. I sat at my kitchen table that afternoon with the window open and the clock ticking. The paper on the kitchen counter looked smaller than I expected. A cup of coffee steamed and left a ring where I had rested it. My fingers hovered over the phone. I didn't think of recognition. I thought of the choir loft and the way the organ swelled during hymns. I thought of the faces at the funeral who had brought casseroles and sat with me until the phone stopped ringing. I thought stupidly and tenderly that gratitude ought to have a shape. Objects in the sanctuary took on new meaning that week. The brass cross above the altar that catches the sun. How many hands had touched it in blessing? The pale blue curtain that hides the choir room. How often had it muffled whispers? Even the empty bench seemed to lean, waiting. I folded and refolded the napkins for the bazaar, my fingers learning the pattern like a prayer. I watched Bishop Miller across the fellowship hall, heard him laugh and smooth his sleeve. He reached for a cup and his episcopal ring winked in the light. Something in that glint felt like a promise, or like a ledger closing. When I finally called and asked to speak with him, my voice surprised me with its steadiness. "Bishop, can I talk to you after the service?" I said. There was a pause on the other end. A small intake of breath that sounded like someone measuring how heavy a thing could be. He agreed. I folded the napkins into my bag and slipped the envelope into the inner pocket, where it rested against the little notebook I used to keep track of birthdays and bills. It felt like tucking a secret into a Bible. In those hours before the transfer I walked through the rooms of my life. Kitchen light, hospital corridors, the stained glass purples, and felt the weight of the choice settle into my bones. I was 62. I had been a wife, a mother, a volunteer, a neighbor. I was not invisible. And yet, some part of me wondered how being generous and being acknowledged had become two different things. The answer I would find out soon enough. But that morning, all I felt was the hum of the radiator and the quiet certainty that I could not leave the roof to leak on the people who had held me when my world cracked. The office smelled like lemon cleaner and old paper. The light through the blinds made bars across the bishop's desk. Bishop Miller sat behind it, neat suit, hands folded, the episcopal ring catching a strip of sun and winking like a small accusation. George Peterson lingered by the doorway with his leather folder, throat working the way it does when he is uncomfortable. I felt my palms go cold before I even said hello. "Thank you for coming, Martha," Bishop Miller said, as if he'd been expecting me all week. His voice was soft and practiced. His smile had that patient edge, the one that tells you he's used to steering conversations where he wants them to go. I sat across from him on a chair that squeaked. I could feel the seam of my cardigan under my fingers. My heart was a small steady drum. The transfer confirmation burned like a coin in the inner pocket of my bag. I kept touching the place where it sat, as if the paper might change shape and tell me something easier to live with. I wanted to help, I said. The words came out smaller than I felt. I don't need the money. I thought. It's what we should do. Miller nodded. He steepled his fingers, a gesture I'd seen in the pulpit and at council meetings, calm, composed, practiced. He leaned forward just a little, and the office clock ticked very loud. This is a blessing, Martha, he said. Truly. But I would suggest discretion. He glanced toward the door where George hovered. You know how the community responds when names are highlighted. There are families we want to encourage to give publicly. It might be better if this remained internal. Discretion. The word landed like cold water. George shifted his weight. His folder made a soft, defensive sound when he moved it closer to his chest. The bishop's ring pressed into the top of his finger as he folded and unfolded his hand. I could smell the faint scent of his cologne, citrus and something woody like new furniture. You want me to not be named? My voice surprised me by being steadier. There was a tightness in my throat, like a knot pulling inward. My hands trembled and I felt suddenly 14 again, waiting to be called on in Sunday school and afraid of giving the wrong answer. Bishop Miller's smile didn't slip, but his eyes did something small and quick. An aside, a calculation. We don't want anyone to feel like they can't participate because one person covered the whole bill. We want to foster a sense of community effort. For future campaigns, it's better if multiple families are seen as invested. The room seemed to tilt. I could hear the radiator's faint clank as if it were part of the conversation. I thought of Henry's hands on my shoulder, the way he could make the world feel sensible again. I could see the choir loft in my mind, the way the organ swelled when we sang, the way neighbors had brought casseroles for weeks after his funeral. I thought of all that quiet care, and of the seedy smell of my parents' house that would now be folded into the roof over the parish. You want me invisible? I asked, and it felt sharper than I meant. His smile softened. Not invisible, Martha. Protected. Respected. He chose his words like someone arranging flowers, considering color and balance. There are people whose support we highlight because it helps the church in the long run. George cleared his throat, a small paper-sounding sound. He looked as if someone had named a subject in a sermon that made him uncomfortable, money. I felt heat rise to my face. For a moment every memory of this place unfurled like an old hymn. The baptisms, the Christmas pageants, Henry's laughter at the back row. The idea that my name might be withheld as a kindness felt wrong in a way that bypassed policy. Felt personal. My hands found the edge of my bag. The paper inside shifted. I smelled the faint lemon of the cleaner again and the sweet, stale tang of coffee from the morning mugs on the credenza. I thought of my father's voice. In the doubt, choose the truth. It was small, stubborn, like an ember you keep alive by fanning it with ordinary breath. If I don't have my name used, I said slowly, then what is this? A gift or a transaction? Bishop Miller's expression smoothed into pastoral concern. Martha, we want people to feel part of something. Community giving encourages others. This is stewardship. Stewardship. A neat word that swaddled something larger. I imagine future newsletters with polite columns praising familiar names. I imagined the Atkins family smiling into the camera, while parishioners whispered and pointed. I imagined my children reading an article and seeing no reference to the house their grandparents built. The idea of that absence felt like a bright stone under my shoe, small, sharp, impossible to ignore. I breathed in long and slow. My fingers closed around the transfer confirmation in my bag, until I felt the edges crease. My pulse was loud in my wrists. The radiator clicked. Outside, a child laughed. The sound came through the window and sounded small and shocked. All right, I heard myself say. But I want something in writing about how the funds are used. I want receipts. And I'd like a I woke before dawn the next morning and tapped the bank app. My thumb hovered over the final confirmation. The act felt heavy and holy in the same breath. I thought of Henry tapping his foot to the organ, of my father's steady voice. I pressed send. The app confirmed the transfer. The sound it made felt like a bell, clear, irrevocable. I folded my hands on the table and felt the old steady rhythm inside me. I had chosen. The roof would be fixed. The rest, I would see. I was folding the tablecloths for the bazaar when I heard them before I saw them. Two voices low as if the carpet itself might listen. The fellowship hall door was ajar. Bishop Miller's laugh, too smooth, slid into the hallway. Mr. Peterson's cough punctuated the sentences like a poorly timed metronome. We should highlight the Atkins family in the newsletter, Bishop Miller said. The words were casual, like offering a cup of coffee. It'll help future campaigns. And Mrs. Winters? George's voice was smaller, like paper being folded. There was a pause. I felt the linen in my hands crease under my grip. My fingers left an impression. Keep it discreet, the bishop replied. She's elderly. We don't need to publicize her finances. Elderly. The word landed in my chest like a stone. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the hum of the overhead lights. I could feel the pattern of the cloth under my fingertips. Tiny diamonds pressed into cotton, like a memory you can touch. I stepped into the hall deliberately, as if I were looking for a lost pen. They looked up, startled in a way that told me they had hoped the walls would keep their words. The bishop's smile was perfect. Mr. Peterson's throat worked the way it does when he's uncomfortable, that little nervous cough crowding out whatever honesty might try to come through. Is there something I can help with? I asked. My voice was steady because I'd learned how to steady it. It surprised me how calm I sounded. Oh, Martha, the bishop said, and for the first time his practiced tone trembled just a little. We were just discussing outreach. George's eyes flicked to my hands, to the small bulge of my purse. I could see the arithmetic run across his face. Columns of numbers adding up, subtractions made tidy by omission. You mean discretion? I let the word hang between us. My nails tapped the seam of the tablecloth. The clock over the door clicked an impatient minute. Bishop Miller's fingers steepled. We want to encourage visible giving. It helps others give. Help others give, I echoed. The phrase sounded thinner coming from him. He was arranging words like flowers, choosing the prettiest stems while discarding the roots. George swallowed. It's for the greater good, he said, and the sentence fell like a plea. I thought of Henry's hands, broad, calloused, the way he would steady a ladder as if the world were made of planks and trust. I thought of the way my father used to say, in that flat, unarguable voice, in doubt, choose the truth. The ember of that sentence clicked awake behind my ribs. When they thanked the community later that week, the phrase felt rehearsed, like a line delivered by someone who'd never been hungry. Mr. Peterson's report showed donor families with neat check marks, but no line for the woman who had transferred $70,000 in one quiet morning. The lists were tidy. The truth was not. On the Sunday of the dedication, the hall was packed. Balloons bobbed like small guilty heads. A banner slung across the back read, "Thank you to all who helped." The bishop mounted the small stage and spoke of unity. His hands were light on the podium, as if he were passing along the weather report. We collected over 60,000, he praised, thanks to the generosity of our donors. He called names: Atkins, Thompson, Parker. Each name brought a small, well-practiced applause. Faces turned, smiled, bowed slightly. I watched the effect of recognition. It warmed people like a lamp. My heart did something loud and sudden. My hands that have folded napkins, held hospital blankets, and smoothed a child's fevered brow, felt like strangers. The envelope in my bag was a weight I could no longer ignore. I stood before I thought about the consequences. The microphone was cold under my palm. The room hushed in that way only a familiar place can, like a breath held across generations. "Bishop Miller," I said. My voice surprised me by being clear. "I transferred $70,000 to the church account. The transfer receipt is in this envelope." I slid the paper onto the podium and felt the small rustle like the turning of a page. There was a sound, someone's program dropping, the soft scrape of a chair. The bishop's smile faltered. Mr. Peterson's face went pale, then red, then something else entirely. An apology trying to find its way into the room. "You did what?" a woman whispered, and her voice carried like a stone skipping water. "I did this because I love this church," I said. "Because this is where Henry and I baptized our children. I did not do it for applause. I did not do it to hide." My hands trembled, small movements, the way someone might tremble when a memory becomes too bright. I felt the seams of my dress against my knee. I touched my wedding band as if I could steady my breath against the cool metal. The silence that followed had weight. It pressed into my shoulders in a way that made me feel decades of Sundays at once. The baptisms, the casseroles, the palms pressed into hands in times of grief. Maria found me afterward in the parking lot. Her eyes were wet. She reached for my hands as if to make sure I was still myself. "We had no idea," she said. Her voice broke on the last word. She squeezed my fingers. The warmth of her palm made something loosen inside me. Others came. Some to apologize, some to say they felt betrayed. The pews thinned the next Sunday. The bishop was reassigned within weeks. Administrative language for footsteps leaving a familiar corridor. Mr. Peterson kept his leather folder a little closer. He said when he passed me on a rainy morning, "I'm sorry," and the words were small private things. He didn't try to explain. He couldn't. I go now to a small chapel 10 blocks away. No banners. No lists. The hymnals are worn. The wood polished by palms that come for no names at all. I still fold the napkins sometimes out of habit or prayer. I still touch my wedding band. And when the doubt comes thin and sharp, I remember my father's voice and the warmth of Maria's hand. The truth, it turns out, has a way of finding a room to live in. After that Sunday the shape of the room changed. The same ceilings, the same hymnals, but the way people treated the space felt different. Like a house after a broken window, when everyone steps around the fracture as if the glass might still cut them. At first it was small things. A smile that didn't reach an eye. A handshake that skimmed my wrist. Maria kept looking away before she could say anything more than, "We had no idea." And then filling the silence with a question about the church bake sale. Her laugh came quick, like someone covering a cough. Pews that once held familiar clusters opened up at my approach. People who used to cross aisles to sit beside me found new reasons to park 2 rows up. The woman who used to bring me platefuls at potluck suddenly remembered she had errands to run. I began to notice the way chairs were angled away when I entered the fellowship hall, how programs rustled louder when I passed. It felt like watching a tide recede. Everything that had been close to shore slipping back until the sand was bare. At the coffee hour, eyes slid off me. Conversations folded when I neared, the cadence dropping to polite air. And then a laugh that might have been a laugh if it weren't so fast. "Oh, Martha," a man said once, then caught himself and turned a page. George Peterson's cough became more frequent, not from any cold. He coughed when he saw me, when he passed me a clipboard, when his leather folder shifted under his arm. The folder seemed to get in the way of words. Whispers started like the soft rustle of programs. Never full sentences. Mostly the tilt of a head and a mouth that moved. I caught fragments. "Did you hear? So much money. Keeps things from running smoothly." The words had the texture of paper left in rain. Edges softened but the stain unmistakable. People whom I had seen through years of illness visits and casseroles spoke my name with distance, careful as if it might break if handled roughly. Doors closed a little sooner now. I'd arrive at the church for choir practice and the side door would click before I could get to the handle. the latch catching like a small, deliberate sound. Once, arriving early to fold there were Kinder ruptures too. A couple of members stopped me outside the grocery store only to say, "We're here for you," and then trail off, eyes fixed on the rows of canned goods. Their mouths registered apology, but their bodies had the shape of avoidance. Maria stayed. She stayed like a hand on my shoulder after a fall, steady, warm. A reminder that tactile kindness still existed. She brought casseroles, sometimes two, and left them on my stoop. She sat a little longer in the pews now, her colorful earrings like bright markers of loyalty. When she spoke, people listened. But more often the congregation split into small islands. Some people were angry at the bishop, at me, at the mess of things. They folded their faith into arguments about stewardship and optics, and those arguments, when spoken aloud, hit like cold rain. Others retreated, embarrassed to be seen where scandal had passed. The next Sunday half the pews were empty. It was not dramatic, no shouting, no confrontation. Just absence, like threads removed from a cloth until a new shape emerged. The parish newsletter came out that week with its neat columns and photographs. I held it in my hands at home, the paper smelling faintly of printer ink and lemon cleaner. The same smell that lived in the church office. They thanked donors. They published names. The Atkinses smiled from the top corner. The Thompsons' checkmark glinted on the list. My name was nowhere. My receipt sat in the bottom of my purse like a small, honest weight. Rumors moved faster than the formal announcements. Someone mentioned the bishop's reassignment in a hushed sentence at the post office. Another person blamed me quietly for making trouble, as if truth were a flame that could be contained and someone else should be left holding the scorched paper. For every hand that reached to pat my back, someone else shifted away. There were mornings when I walked past the church and felt a pinch in my chest, as if the building's silhouette had grown a hard edge. I would stand on the sidewalk and look at the new roof, solid, neat, a thing resolved, and feel a strange double ache. The shingles held rain now. The pipes no longer leaked. Practical things had been fixed, and still I found myself counted out of the community that had once included me without question. Isolation taught me new rhythms. I stopped attending some Wednesday meetings. Why sit where eyes would skim right over you? I learned to carry my own casserole to the small chapel 10 blocks away, where no one asked about donors and hymnals were passed quietly with no names attached. There, in the dim light and softer voice, Maria found me sometimes, and we would worship without the clatter of whispered judgment. The hardest moments weren't the slams or the stares. They were the ordinary courtesies that became sharp, the way a neighbor would pause mid-smile and nod elsewhere, as if my presence were a pebble in their shoe. In those small refusals my life was unstitched in the eyes of people I loved. Stung. It made you examine everything. Every casserole, every ride to the hospital, every hymn you'd ever sung, until gratitude felt like a ledger you could no longer balance. And still, when the silence pressed hardest, when the church doors seemed to close a little tighter, I would touch my wedding band. It was cool and steady. It reminded me of Henry's hands, the choir loft, my father's voice. In doubt, choose the truth. The truth had cost me company and comfort. It also gave me a quieter integrity that no closed door could reach. The hall was warm from the old radiator, and the applause felt like a wind that pushed against my ribs. Bishop Miller's voice floated above it. Smooth, practiced, the cadence of someone who knows how to hold attention. He thanked the community again, and the phrase rolled over the room like a hymn with the vowels smoothed out. I could taste the stale coffee and cake at the back of my throat. It made my mouth bitter. My hands were folded in my lap, fingers braided the way I'd done when I was a girl praying on a bedroom floor. I kept returning to my wedding band, the cool ring that sits heavy and familiar. It steadied me, and I kept touching it without thinking, as if I could press a memory into the present and slow everything down. The envelope lay against my knee like a small, impossible thing. The paper crinkled when I moved. $70,000, black numbers on white, and my bank stamp. I had carried it to choir practice, to Wednesday volunteering, and now here, under the glare of the hall lights and the sheen of polished shoes. The organ's low notes hummed beneath the bishop's words. The crucifix over the stage caught a strip of afternoon light and shone like a watchful eye. He started naming donors: Adkins, Thompson, Parker, the usual names that had come to mean influence more than stewardship. Each mention brought a ripple of applause. People stood, smiles practiced. A woman too rose up, leaned forward, hands clasped in delighted surprise. The sound of chairs shifting was small but sharp in the hush between names. I felt my breath hitch. I breathed out slowly, matching it to the humming of the organ as if rhythm could hold me. My fingers tightened around the edge of the envelope. I told myself to be calm. You can do this, I thought. Speak plainly. Do not let anger round your words. I wanted to keep my voice small and true. When the bishop paused for another round of applause, I stood. My legs moved before the thought did. The motion felt inevitable, like a tide lifting a shell. The microphone was colder than I expected when I picked it up, metal against skin, and the wood of the podium smelled faintly of wax and old polish. A votive candle in a glass holder at the corner of the podium trembled as someone brushed past, and its flame shortened, guttering under a slight draft. For a second the light went thin and then steadied again. The tiny darkening pulled at something inside me, like a small private omen. Bishop Miller, I said. My voice surprised me by being steadier than my hands. I laid the envelope on the podium and let the papers slide out, the soft rustle unusually loud in the quiet. The room inhaled. I told them. I said the number 70,000, and I watched the faces compress in that instant, like photographs being folded. Bishop Miller's smile changed. The practice warmth tightened. George Peterson's hand flew to his throat in his old nervous cough. The leather folder under his arm shifted as if to hide. Someone in the front row nudged the small wooden cross that sat next to the register on the podium. It wobbled when the man rose to stand and came down with a hollow tap onto the wood. The sound echoed in the hall like a small thing dropped. People glanced at it without thinking, an unconscious search for sign. A candle at the other side flickered again and blew out, unhindered by draft or draft, simple mundane physics, but the darkness it left felt like paper pulled from a candlelit page. For a moment everything tightened into a single point, the rustle of the papers, the small patter of chairs, the soft clink of a coffee cup knocked off a saucer in the back. Maria's face came into my mind, bright earrings, the warmth of her hands. I thought of Henry, his easy chuckle at the organ, the steady press of his palm when he wanted me to be brave. I thought of my father's voice. In the doubt, choose the truth. My hands shook. I clasped them together on the podium and felt the grain of the wood under my knuckles, the varnish slightly tacky. I took a breath, counted 3, then another. My voice, when it returned, was quieter, clearer. This is not for recognition, I said. I did not give this to be named in a newsletter. I gave because this church has been my home. The words landed in the room like coins. Some faces softened. Others hardened as if a film had cooled over them. Bishop Miller's mouth was a practiced smile that had lost its warmth. He looked at the papers, at the bank stamp, then back up at me. There was that small flicker of irritation, petty, almost bored, like someone adjusting a ribbon that had come loose. He cleared his throat and reached for the words that would smooth it over. But the mechanism that always turned something into a message failed for him. He sounded smaller, less sure. A chair scraped sharply. An old man in the back muttered something, an apology? A judgment? The sound was swallowed by the hush that followed. I felt the weight of everyone's breath like a cloth pressed to my face. I wanted to hush them with a hand, to say there was nothing to be ashamed of. I wanted to tell them that truth is not a loud thing but a steady one. The crucifix on the wall tilted for a beat when someone shifted a step too close to the stage. It hung there, slightly askew, as if even the room recognized a shift. A child near the back whispered a question to her mother. The certainty in the woman's reply was thin. When I finished, the silence left an imprint. It hung in the rafters and the stained glass like dust. Outside, the parking lot smelled of wet mulch and gasoline. Maria found me there later and wrapped both hands around mine like she was anchoring me to shore. But in that suspended moment in the hall, with a votive's flame sputtering and a crucifix hanging off-kilter, the truth felt like a small stubborn coin laid on the altar, and I had placed it there myself. The weeks after the unveiling felt like walking through rooms I once knew by heart and finding the furniture rearranged. Pews that had been mine for decades were empty in a slow, polite way, people not angry so much as embarrassed. Conversations slid when I entered. The coffee hour thinned out like a soup left too long on the stove. But the practical things were happening. The roofers came, ladders tongued the sky, and the gutters were righted. The work was fast, efficient, men with gloves and steady hands doing a job no sermon could do. Rain that had once leaked near the hymnals ran harmlessly down new shingles. The building stopped showing its wounds. Then Bishop Miller was reassigned. The word reassigned smells like paper, official blank, a polite closing line. There was no shouting, no dramatic exit. One morning the car was gone from the rectory and a cardboard box sat on the church office desk. Its flaps folded closed like the end of a chapter. People said the right things in the right tones. Some left the parish. Some stayed. The hall shifted as houses do when neighbors move. Something I had not expected happened after that. An interim rector arrived, quiet, unassuming, who read my note requesting a simple mention when the roof was finished. No flourish. No announcement on the front page. Just a small line in the parish bulletin the Sunday after the final shingle. The roof was completed with the generosity of our congregation. We wish to thank Mrs. Martha Winters for her leadership and support. My name. Plain type, no gold leaf, no ceremony. I took the folded bulletin into my hands at the kitchen table like a sacrament. The paper smelled of printer ink and lemon cleaner, the ordinary sense that had followed me through all of this. It was not vindication. It was quieter than that. But seeing my name printed, no adjectives, no fanfare, unclenched something in me. It was proof that the ledger of truth had at least a single honest column. I thought of my father's voice. In the doubt, choose the truth. He would have been pleased with how little drama I needed to feel right. People began to come to me, not in crowds, but in the soft, awkward ways of neighbors trying to put a vase of flowers back in its place. Maria stayed. She was a steady presence, arriving early, lingering late, her laugh less urgent now, more like a bell that had been tested and found true. A few others came with eyes wet and apologies trembling in the corners of their mouths. Some sat with me on the church steps and simply listened while I talked about Henry or the way the winter light used to fall on the altar. Others said nothing at all and left a casserole on my stoop. George Peterson surprised me. He had been the man with the leather folder, the paper cough, the look that avoided meeting my gaze. One rainy morning he crossed the church lawn and stopped at my front steps. He carried his folder like something that had become too heavy for him to lift. When he spoke he did not explain so much as confess. "I'm sorry, Martha," he said, the words small and private. "I was afraid. I did what I was told." His hand shook as if the folder inside carried glass. He left it with me. Inside, a ledger marked with entries I could not make sense of, and a note. I was wrong. I'm sorry. He did not make a scene. He did not demand absolution. He simply laid down the burden he had been carrying and walked away. I forgave him, not as a magnanimous act but because forgiveness is the form honesty takes when it wants to be useful. Cleared something for both of us. He began to show up again in the pews now and then, head bowed, not because he sought my approval but because something in him had shifted. Sometimes the smallest admissions are the ones that change a room. There were costs. Invitations did not return. Old friends faltered in their warmth. The parish felt smaller. I stopped going on Sundays to the big hall. I found a small chapel 10 blocks away where the hymnals were worn and the faces were not lined with the particular memory of what had happened. People passed the plate and did not watch who put in the bills. The pastor there knew my name because I had given it when I first came. She did not ask why I had left the other place. The service was quieter. The singing was less polished but truer. The resolution was not a parade. It was a series of small honest acts, an admission, a printed line in a bulletin, a neighbor bringing soup, a quiet apology from a man who had hidden behind procedure. Together they added up to something that felt like rightness. I kept the transfer receipt in my little notebook drawer. I still touch my wedding band. When the old doubts creep in, did I make the right choice? I hear Henry's foot tapping in the choir loft and my father's flat, steady voice. I made the choice that matched the person I wanted to be. Now, when I walk past St. Matthew's on my morning route, I sometimes pause and look up at the new roof. It's a sensible thing, shingles neat as a soldier's rose. The building stands straighter in the rain. Inside, perhaps, new conversations will happen about transparency and honor. Outside on the sidewalk, my life continues. Smaller perhaps, but with room to breathe. Truth did not make everything easy. It did, oddly, make everything livable. And that, after all the years of hymns and quiet service, feels like a kind of grace. The church door closes behind me and the sound is small and precise, like a sentence finished. For a long time I used to time my life by doors. When Henry came home, when the kids left for college, when the funeral director tucked a folded program into my hands. This closing feels different. It is not slammed or dramatic. It is a neat, ordinary thing. Hinges catching, wood meeting frame, and the quick, final hush that follows. I stand on the sidewalk and let the moment settle. The new roof looks sensible and honest in the rain. It does what roofs do. It keeps the rain out. People will still come. The organ will still rise. Candles will still be lit. But the shape of belonging has shifted. There is an empty bench near the front aisle that used to hold Henry's coat over the back. He liked to leave it there like a flag. Now the bench is bare, polished in the way an old spot is polished by absence. When I walk into the small chapel 10 blocks away, the wood underfoot smells of lemon oil and years of hands. The hymnals have soft, rounded corners. The organist playing is less bold than the one at St. Matthew's, no grand swells, but there is an honesty in the way the notes tremble. People look at you as if they might learn the contour of you, slowly, over pews and quiet hellos. Maria sits there sometimes, her earrings catching the light like small promises. She gives me a wave that is both ordinary and brave. At home I keep the transfer receipt folded in my little notebook drawer. When my hands are idle I find myself touching the paper inside the sleeve as if it were a prayer bead. The numbers printed there have no glamour, black ink on white paper, yet they are heavy with consequence. I don't bring them out to show anyone anymore. They are mine in the way a scar is. A record of what has been done. George came once, drenched from an early spring rain, holding a folder that seemed to weigh him down. He said the words I had hoped for and never expected, simple, small. "I'm sorry, Martha." He was not circumspect. He was tender in his awkwardness. He left the ledger beside my door like an offering I didn't need to accept. That was the day I realized forgiveness is an action as much as a word. It cleared space in both of us for something like peace. People still tiptoe in my life. Some doors remain half closed. Invitations don't return to their old fullness. The bridge club that used to meet in the parish basement started convening elsewhere. Neighbors find errands to run on Sundays. There are mornings I pass St. Matthew's and feel a quick, painful hollow, an ache not of loss alone but of reordered expectation. And yet the ache is tempered now by a steady pulse under my ribs, the memory of Henry tapping his foot to a hymn, my father's flat advice, the small, stubborn truth I chose. There are mornings I wake to the kind of light that slides across the kitchen linoleum, and fills the room with a pale certainty. I make the coffee the same way, let it steam in the winter chill, and then sit at the table with the little notebook where I keep birthdays and bills. I write a grocery list. I answer volunteer calls. I fold napkins for the small chapel's potluck, thinking of the way there are days I still hesitate before opening the church door. The memory of that afternoon, the microphone cold under my palm, the paper sliding onto the podium, hovers in the small muscle of my throat. Then I remember the twist of a votive's flame, the crucifix slightly askew, the hush that fell like a cloth. I remember Maria's hand on mine in the parking lot, warm and sure. I remember George leaving his folder on my step. I remember the bulletin with my name printed without fanfare. And I know the choice I made was not for applause but for alignment with the person I wanted to be. The chapel's doors close behind me, sometimes in a gust of wind that makes the candle flames lean. I like that sound, the way the world rearranges itself when you step through. Once, after a service, I lingered at the back and listened to footsteps walking away down the sidewalk. They started as a cluster and then thinned into single steps, then a single step receding, and finally the soft staccato of one person, then nothing. The last sound was the wind moving the door closed. It was small, final, and honest. I rest my hand on my wedding band. It is cool and real. It anchors me. The band is a little dented where a rock must have struck Henry's hand once, decades ago, when he was hauling lumber. I smile at that memory because it belongs to the life we made, imperfect, steady, ordinary. There is an end here. The parish hall with its glossy floors and committee folders is not quite the same house I remember. People have walked through different doors. Some chapters closed with cardboard boxes on desks and quiet goodbyes. But endings are not only endings. They are openings to space where new songs can be learned, new benches can be warmed by different bodies, truth can be spoken in softer voices. I step into the chapel, the small room smelling faintly of lemon oil and coffee, and find a seat near the window. Light falls like an old promise. The hymn starts. I sing out, not to be heard or noticed, but because my voice is part of the room now, small, honest, steady. Outside, the wind finds the church door and closes it with a kind, decisive click. I breathe in. I breathe out. Something ended. Something began. The weeks after the dedication unspooled like a spool of thread I hadn't meant to tug. The roof was fixed. Neat rows of shingles that shed rain like a coat, and the building looked grateful in the gray weather. Men with gloves and steady hands did what sermons cannot. They climbed ladders and made things whole again. Inside, the organ still hummed, candles still burned. Outside, the life of the parish rearranged itself around a truth that had finally been named. At first the change was small and sharp. People shifted away at coffee hour like a breeze had blown through the room. Invitations thinned. The Bridge Club moved their meeting. Familiar handshakes shortened to nods. The ledger of daily kindnesses I'd held for decades seemed to lose a few pages. It stung in quiet ways. A casserole left on my stoop without a knock. A church directory that no one remembered to update with my name. It felt like walking through a house where the furniture had been moved while I slept. But other things reknit. Maria kept coming. She brought soup, bright earrings, and the kind of laughter that patches holes. Her hand on my arm in the parking lot after I spoke stayed with me, the warmth of it like a benediction. A few voices unstitched the embarrassment and said, "I'm sorry." George Peterson, Mr. Papercoff, leather folder tucked under his arm, came one rainy morning with his coat dripping and a handful of small, awkward apologies. He left a ledger on my step and walked away lightened, I think, as if admitting wrong had made his spine less bent. An interim rector added a single, plain sentence to the parish bulletin when the roof was finished. The roof was completed with the generosity of our congregation. We wish to thank Mrs. Martha Winters for her leadership and support. No fanfare. No brass plate. Just my name set in ordinary type. I took that folded leaflet to my kitchen table and held it like a relic, ink and paper smelling faintly of printer toner and lemon cleaner. It was not triumph. It was a settling of small dust. I stopped going to the big hall every Sunday. The pews there carried the memory of too many small awkwardnesses. Instead, I walked 10 blocks to a tiny chapel whose hymnals have soft, rounded corners and whose organist plays without aiming for grandeur. People look at each other there, as if they have time to learn what one another will become. The singing is less polished and more honest. The pew under my hand warms with other palms, not because a name was printed in a newsletter, but because people have chosen to be present. At home, I keep the transfer receipt folded into the little notebook where I track birthdays and grocery lists. Sometimes my fingers find it by habit, and I feel the thinness of the paper against my thumb like a coin. The number on it, 70,000, means less now than the shape it made in the lives around me. It bought shingles and peace of mind. It also revealed old hierarchies, the way visibility and influence can be mistaken for worth. That cost lingered. But so did a quieter thing, the rightness of having said what I felt I must. Sometimes I still walk past St. Matthew's and pause. The new roof looks sensible and true in the rain. The building does what buildings do. It shelters people from weather. Inside, perhaps new conversations will be had about transparency. Outside, life carries on. Neighbors nod as I pass. A few doors that had closed remain ajar again. Others stay shut. That's how it is, people rearrange, some return, some don't. But what grew back around me had a different tone. Less about who gets named, more about who shows up. There are nights when doubt returns, thin and hungry. Did I make a scene? Was the silence afterward worse than the omission? I touch my wedding band, cool and familiar, and remember Henry's foot tapping to the organ, my father's flat counsel. In the doubt, choose the truth. That rule has the shape of ordinary courage, small, steady, sometimes costly. Forgiveness arrived in different forms. A folded apology on my step, Maria's casseroles, a small printed line in a bulletin. No dramatic reconciliation, no public penance. Just the slow, ordinary work of people learning to face what they had not seen. I kept volunteering at the hospital. I still fold napkins for potlucks. I still fold and refold the towel in my hands until the fabric remembers the shape of my palms. The secret, my secret, the transfer tucked into my inner pocket for a week, had changed from a talisman into a weight I no longer needed to carry alone. Standing at the podium was not about being noticed. It was about setting a small truth down in a room that needed it. The roof may have been the practical need, but what I walked away with was something else. The knowledge that honesty can be messy, but it leaves you able to breathe. I live with the soft aftermath of what happened. There are scars, sure, friendships that never quite recovered. There are mornings when the shadow of that day crosses my kitchen table, and I feel a flicker of regret. Then I touch my band, breathe in the smell of coffee, and fold a napkin. The life I've built is quieter. It is less crowded with pretense. There is space to sing, to tend, to be small and real. In the drawer, the receipt rests like a coin that has finally been spent. I am older now, steadier. I still choose truth when my hands tremble. I still love a choir loft and the way sunlight falls through stained glass. And sometimes, when I am brave, I look up at the church roof and feel the small, steady satisfaction of a thing properly mended. I let the secret breathe at last. If you've made it this far, thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the end. If you feel it in your heart, please subscribe so you won't miss the next stories, and keep walking with me by watching the other videos I've prepared with care. And please, share in the comments what you thought of my testimony. I will read every word.